Police Fire Rescue Subcommittee. Before we start today, I'd just like to put on record my thanks to, and I'm sure the thanks to the subcommittee for the excellent work undertaken by the previous chairman, Councillor Stephen Thompson, who did a lot of work during the Pathfinder process and did an excellent job, and I'm sure you'll all agree with that. Second thing I'd like to say is a report on the police review of traffic wardens and public counter service provision will be on the agenda for the full council meetings to be held next week. Therefore, this item will not be discussed at today's meeting.
Thanks, Chair. I'm pleased about that because there's quite a bit of interest in that. So if it's going to be deferred to the full council, I welcome that to have a chance of a bigger debate because it will affect most of the region. So I welcome that news.
Yeah, I agree with that totally, man. Three, I have an urgent item of business in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, properties, estate, strategic intent referred to this subcommittee from full council on Tuesday, which we'll take at the end of the agenda. I intend to give members a chance to read the report before we consider it. We have Kate Thompson, Police Area Commander, and Neville Wright, Fire Local Senior Officer with us today. We also have two representatives from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service with us today, being David Boyle, an Assistant Chief Officer, West Area, and Grant Toms, Board Member. We also have with us today Richard Whidden from the Improvement Service, who has a presentation at item 6 on the agenda today. So welcome to you all. Just to remind you that this meeting will be recorded and that the recording will subsequently be available for public listening. Sederunt and Apologies, Claire.
Chairman, my apologies from the Chairman, Councillor Wood, and also apologies from Councillors Blake, Davidson, Forster, McCutcheon and Peacock. There are 4 members present.
And any declarations of interest today? Thanks. I'm looking a bit for people and I know that. Item 3, minute of meeting of 6th of June 2013. This minute is for noting, have been approved already by full council. Thank you. Item 4, Police Fire and Rescue Subcommittee Remit, a report by the Director Chief Executive Service. The report reaffirms that the subcommittee has a focus on police and fire and rescue matters, and this will continue until the council reviews future committee remits near the end of the year. Claire, have you anything to add to that?
No, Chairman, nothing to add to the report.
Any questions from members on that report?
Chair, I fully appreciate there's going to be a review of administration and delegation to committees, and the report's coming, I believe, in November. So it's October now, so I don't know if there's going to be any big major changes, but I do hope that we keep a focus through the new committee structure on police and fire and community safety in general. I don't know I'm sure Derek would want to put his hands on the table for, prior to a report coming, but I feel personally that I hope that we still have a good focus on this.
Any other members? Graham?
Thanks, Chair. I would echo what Ronnie's just said, and I think it's essential that we continue to have a committee and that we do sort of scrutinise what both those services are doing locally. It is very important to the local people that we keep an eye on this and make representation if and when we need to. So I would back what's been said already, and I would note the recommendations.
Thank you. Derek, do you have anything to add to that?
Nothing to add. Nothing to add, Chairman.
Oh, sorry, Jack.
Thank you, John Blank. I would like to echo what had been said previously, and I think it's vitally important that this committee continues, because how else are we going to make sure that the interests of the people in Dumfries and Galloway are going to be looked after
Thank you for that. We just done to the recommendations. Recommendation. Members are asked to note the subcommittee has a focus on police and fire and rescue matters, and this will continue whilst the council reviews future committee remit. All agreed? Thank you. Item 6, presentation by National Advisor for, number 5. Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service performance management arrangements, a report by the Assistant Chief Executive. This is to advise members of the performance management arrangements of Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and seeks agreement for the reporting arrangements to Dumfries and Galloway Council. Derek.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Nothing to add to the report. More than happy to take feedback from members, but what I would say is that the clear will of this committee has always been to ensure that you have effective performance management arrangements in place, and I think today's agenda, as well as the attendance of the national representatives, does clearly give an indication that that will is being enacted, and therefore, as you can see in the report, there are a range of arrangements in place. Indeed, at today's agenda, we have the quarterly performance report from Fire and Rescue colleagues, and the November committee will include the 6-month performance report from police. In addition to that, we also have reports going forward for performance scrutiny by area committees. So simply to confirm, Chair, that the will of the committee has been taken forward. We've developed performance management arrangements. Happy to take any points from members and then at the appropriate time consider the recommendations. Thank you, Chairman.
Members, run it.
Yeah, fully accept what Derek said there. However, area committees have a scrutiny role now, and we get 2 performance reports per year, I believe, from both police and fire. However, there's a disconnect for area committees since we went to the new area framework, and this has been said a few times, that we used to get a monthly update from the local inspectors, so Annandale and Eskdale and vice versa, equally across the 4 areas. We don't get that intimate stuff, if you like. You get 6 monthly reports, and it's broken down to areas, but we feel the area committees could do with a bit more input from police and fire on a more regular basis about stuff that we can talk about. It's okay looking at performance because it tends to be, but there's no way of raising issues. That disconnect hasn't been sorted. I remember Stephen House, when he was announcing the change in April, that area committees are going to have a vital role. Keep it local, keep it community-based, and that's not happened. And it's maybe too early, I don't know. And I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of the area committees, because I know it's been said at our area committee, not just by me, but by others. And in fact, it was actually minuted at my last area committee about having the local inspector come and have a wee talk. I know community councils get visits, and I know there's other groups get visits, but as an area committee who we're all sitting together, we don't get that. So that as part of the performance, I could see that as an improvement. I know it's time consuming sometimes, but we've lost that ability now just to ask questions on a more routine basis.
I think you speak for all members, Ronnie, when you say about that input that we had before, the more personalised input, because it is missed. Could I ask maybe Kate or Neville if they've any thoughts on that?
Shortly we'll be going through the consultation process for the 3-year plan that will come from the strategic plan that's just been almost passed with the council's comments being taken on board. What would look through that consultation process is what you want from us from a point of interaction and communication, because since previously it was every 6 months. It used to be quarterly, and then it went to every 6 months. But if you want that back again to being quarterly, that's not an issue for me. I can ensure that an officer comes along on a quarterly meeting and give you that quarterly update, because that's how we capture our information. From a different point of view, if it's just ongoing statistical evidence, we actually get a monthly report back, so we could actually send out by an email or something like that. But I think we need that discussion round about what more information, how you want that face-to-face or electronic dialogue to go ahead. So I'm very open to what any of the members wish from us.
Kate?
I thought I was going to get away with that, Chair. Ours has been a slightly more challenging issue just in terms of two technical systems that have to interface to get the statistical information in the first place. And I think I explained that the last time that my concern was I didn't want to come to or send inspectors. Some of it's about the setup and arrangements for the area committees, but my inspectors to go and provide statistical data that I couldn't put my hand on my heart and say I was actually happy was a proper reflection of the performance in the area. Therefore, how can you scrutinise something that I wasn't actually happy with? We're at a better place now because a lot of the small glitches and a lot of it is just the technical bit. I won't bore you with it, probably because I'm not quite sure I totally understand it. But we're clearer now that the uplift of information, there's a level of accuracy which makes me much more comfortable coming forward, and that's actually what's coming forward at our, the first meeting that next month, that we will present our performance meetings. What I did ask was for a slight stall on any information going out to area committees in advance of that, because I feel this committee is responsible primarily for that scrutiny of policing across Dumfries and Galloway, and that's where it starts. But after that, I'm more than happy to fit in with whatever arrangements are in place. Now, we've asked for, I think as we evolve in terms of our performance management and in terms of the data that we can give to you, that'll end up being on whether it's quarterly or half yearly, getting a bigger report, and quarterly getting a kind of update report. But I'm more than happy that the area committees that subsequently follow that, we try and get some of the data driven down that's very relevant to your local areas, wherever that is. You can appreciate as they work out 8 legacy forces merging into one system, they've started with the big division, the big divisional kind of numbers first, and then that will slowly, they were working down so that they can then give area committee reports which are much more relevant to the area, rather than just getting the big divisional report and that's all you discuss. It isn't actually broken down into your area. So I'm hoping that when I come next month, and I'm fairly optimistic about it, that I can then give you a kind of outline of the reports would not look dissimilar, so that what you would see here is what the area committees would see in terms of format. It would just be very much localised to your area as well. In terms of the inspectors attending any area committees or that engagement, you know you've always had my support for that, and I actually valued that approach, and we will continue to support that. That's not going to change because it is the same inspectors that you've been engaged with for some considerable time, and any changes are just personnel changes as opposed to anything else. So I'm more than happy to support that.
Graham?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Since there is a perception that since the change of the police to the new all-encompassing Scottish Police Force, we have seen less police attendance at some community councils. Whether that's fact or perception, I'm not absolutely certain. I don't know if there would be governance issues with changing the area framework to accommodate you more than twice a year. I just don't know, because we normally would look at 2, certainly in Wigtonshire, we look at 2 sort of reports per meeting plus other events. We have a very good, in the Mid-Galloway area, we have a very good relationship with the police. The local members meet with the local inspector on a fairly regular basis, and if there are any major incidents, we don't get that many in that part of the world, but if there are any major incidents, we get informed right away by someone from Newton Stewart Police Station, provided it's still there. But so we have a good relationship in our area. I can't speak for other areas because I don't know how they operate, but I would back what Ronnie says, that we really need to see as much of you as we can. We don't have that same relationship with the fire service. So, Neville, you know, it might be a good thing to have an odd evening or something, or meeting with the local members in each area, just to sort of inform them of what's going on and what movements and what changes are being made, etc., etc. So, you know, there may be room for improvement there, but by and large with the police, we're relatively happy. We do get regular inputs from the police and the licensing board in Wigtonshire, which is an ongoing problem. I appreciate what they're saying, but I'm just not sure about the governance issues with the area framework. And I like the hair, Kate. I hardly recognise when you come in the door.
Thanks, Graham. Neville.
Just to come back in there, what's happened in the last month really is the restructure of my local area, and what I've been provided with is a station manager in each of the different area committee areas, and they will now be dedicated to looking after the performance in that local area. So when we get the district plan out, that person will be the person responsible for that plan, and they will be more available to talk to members in the local areas. And I'll take on board what you've said there, and I'll put it down for something that gets rolled out locally.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Neville. I was just wondering if it would be worthwhile maybe putting this to each area committee for discussion at an area committee meeting to see what they would expect as far as communication is concerned from police and fire, and how often that would be. So I would maybe try to add that to the recommendations of the members' wish. Ronnie?
Just one proviso, Chair. I'm really keen that we discuss this, but if we're going to talk Turkey, I prefer these sort of things to be out of the public eye, because we don't want it to be perceived as we're criticising anybody. We're just trying to improve communication. So if it could be a business type meeting that members have locally, so we can talk to both services off the record, if you like. I know that sounds, I don't mean to be evasive in any way, but sometimes things have got to be said both ways that you don't want anybody else to hear, because it'd be perceived the wrong way. So if we're going to do that, I would like that done as a sort of seminar type event, so it's just the members only, and obviously the services involved.
Could I just ask Derek to give us some guidance on that?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think there's two issues here I would suggest, Chairman. Firstly, I think that the wider issue of the performance information that comes to area committees and the ongoing reporting. Can I suggest in the first instance that we note that that is being considered by the Ad Hoc Review of Scheme Subcommittee and looking at for a stronger role for area committees in local matters. So I think that work's very much ongoing, and the spirit of what you've discussed today is certainly within the thinking of that subcommittee. I think paragraph 4.7 in the report clearly indicates that there's ample opportunity for specific events, locality issues to be taken forward to suit local circumstances. We've heard from representatives of Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and they're certainly more than accommodating if there are specific requests for items, members' briefings, member seminars. I think the will is there from both parties at area committee level and from the representatives of the national bodies. And I think on that basis we can just simply note that that facility currently exists, and it's for area committees to take that forward to suit their own circumstances. If that's acceptable to members.
Okay, any other members wishing to speak? I think it just speaks volumes that the value that the input from the police and fire has been in the past at area committees. So you'll know now, Kate, that people do listen to you when you come along. That's good. We go to the recommendation. Thanks, Derek. Recommendation number 1, note the development of performance management arrangements by Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. To agree the performance reporting arrangements as outlined in section 4. With yeah. Okay, agreed. Thank you. Presentation by National Advisor for Police and Fire Reform Improvement Service. Richard Wetton, National Advisor, Safer Communities, Police and Fire Reform Improvement Service, is with us today, and as a brief PowerPoint presentation, a general update about the Safer Communities programme and the work around LSE of police, fire and the connection to safer communities. Thank you, Richard.
How's that? There we go. But no, I've been asked to come down. I've been down many times before, certainly through the process of the Pathfinder. What I'll do today is give you a brief update on, well, sort of précis on where we've been over the last period, a kind of overview of what that means in terms of across the country and where you fit into that, and then have a look how that's playing in terms of development of the national Safer Communities work. So I'll try and be reasonably brief with that. I work for the Improvement Service and the Scottish Government. This is primarily a Scottish Government piece, where the Improvement Service advises Scottish Government on this work. That's where it sits. In terms of the strategic context, most of you will be aware of this. It sits within the national outcomes, the national justice strategy, police and fire reform, most obviously, and within the national community planning priorities of safer and stronger communities and reducing reoffending. All good. The themes for the Safer Communities work within the Justice Department of Government are these, in terms of supporting better practice, promoting community asset work, which is around total place, improved partnership working, improving data sharing, particularly around violence, disorder and other areas of community safety like casualty reduction, mainstreaming education initiatives, building evidence bases, so on and so forth. That's couched underneath a national board to which the services both sit on, as well as COSLA and Solace and many other national organisations. In terms of specific areas of work that we're very interested in at the moment and have been over the last year or so, we're currently reviewing the national non-statutory guidance on the back of police and fire reform, which will form the basis of the new Safer Communities guidance, which will be with you next year. Specific local support for various projects across the country, which is part of my role and other colleagues. We provide network funding and support for national organisations, as well as looking at having an overview of some of the change funds that are out there. And in this respect, the local scrutiny and engagement work and the reform work which this committee represents. All right, okay, just a quick go backwards. The aims of this project were fairly simple. When the new legislation was originally drafted, we could see that going through some of the fundamentals of reform would mean significant change in local accountability. So the purpose of the project was to provide people with a practice run, the Pathfinder process to which this committee was originally formed, which Stephen and John were involved in. The project mandated in December 2011. Full participation of all local authorities in Scotland was sought and achieved, with the essential challenge to test the arrangements and decide on what local arrangements would be required by April this year. This couched in terms of a long history of partnership working in Scotland, a long history of community planning, particularly around community safety and safer communities and public protection, and a lot of collaborative activity with the national agencies. So, where have we got to? So, by last month, you would say that all local scrutiny arrangements across the country are now in place. The joint collaborative statement was published by all the national agencies in support of those committees, which has been shared with everybody as a piece of work to support the work that colleagues in scrutiny do. The interim plans from both services have been produced and essentially have been tested over this year. Those local plans, the local fire plan and the local police plans. The project board for that particular meeting has been disbanded for that particular piece of work because essentially it achieved all its objectives. The HMI joint inspection between police and fire service produced a joint inspection piece, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it's worth having a look at. It comes up with a range of recommendations for going forward for this piece of work. That inspection will be revisited next year as well. There's a written update on the project with lots more detail available should you require it, which goes into all the different arrangements across the country, how many members, who are the conveners, etc., etc. We are producing a range of case studies, which are now more or less available. We are continuing to produce more case studies in the relationship between local community safety operational activity, the work of the scrutiny committees, and the work of strategic safer communities work at a local level. There are, of course, a variety of local approaches. How would we summarise them? Well, they're broadly speaking are the 4 different types of scrutiny that have emerged from the process. The vast majority is traditional scrutiny such as this. Member-led scrutiny, either as an executive committee on its own or as policy and resources or community safety or audit or other, or reporting to a subcommittee reporting to one of those. A number of areas have produced a board arrangement, which is a sort of hybrid of traditional scrutiny. So it's essentially wholly member-led, but with additional officer elements and partner elements brought in to provide additional scrutiny. And I know you visited some of those arrangements during your Pathfinder process. There's full council scrutiny in at least 2, if not 3 areas, which one is because that's the way they do all their business over all scrutiny. 2, because they've decided that for this particular area of business they want to provide scrutiny at full council at this stage. And then the final approach, which is a delegated scrutiny model, normally to the partnership, Safer Communities Partnership. But what you'll find in that schema, using the schema delegation, a delegated scrutiny model will require some formal feedback and reporting to full council at some point during the year. The collaborative statement, which was signed off by COSLA and Solace and all the agencies involved, looks at a range of, these are the 5 key elements of that work, but it's basically a list of lots of different questions for members to ask. Now, many members are very well versed in scrutiny, that's fine, but what we did see going through the Pathfinder process was many members new to scrutiny, and particularly new to scrutiny of third-party services. So that was what the collaborative statement is. So take it or leave it, it's there if you need it. The case studies that we've just finished, looking at the connection between local practice and local scrutiny, are those there. We looked at West Lothian because they had at the time, although they're not now, a particularly innovative arrangement to local tasking and coordinating between the services and local authorities, which involve members and officers as well. And I don't say that they've not in any way drawn back from those arrangements. It's just more areas have begun to follow suit in that respect, and as they begin to formalise a more formal arrangement to broader safer communities work. We looked specifically at the Aberdeen previous legacy Grampian areas fire plan on outcomes, which was particularly interesting. Edinburgh's use of community engagement in creating their police plan, which has fed a lot of the work which is now being rolled out in terms of that generic approach to engagement, which certainly police colleagues are now involved in, and fire colleagues are looking to do something very similar. Highland Council, I think, is a very interesting one for you to look at because of the way they approached their member development in the process. Took a very long run at this, Highland, with lots of intensive work with members about finding out what members exactly wanted to get out of the committees. That's my favourite case study out of those 5 in terms of what they did and how they did it. And Dundee we looked at particularly because that's one of the full council areas. So we were interested in why they took that approach, what was the leadership models that they adopted, and particularly interesting about Dundee is their relationship between the ward or area committees to council and scrutiny. What's emerged then out of that Pathfinder process? What have we learnt? Okay. The investment in building member skills in those areas that took that process, and I know you did that as well in terms of you visiting other areas before you started to make your mind up. That kind of approach has paid off, I would say, in the round. Clearly, in terms of the 32 scrutiny arrangements, they vary dramatically. Some are very detailed. They take a long time. The scrutiny is is intensive but very positive. In other areas, the scrutiny is not really there yet, in terms of there doesn't seem to be any valuable scrutiny in place. Now, that's not just about local members feeling that they're getting to ask the right questions or getting the right answers. It also means using up the valuable time of senior officers from the police and fire service and attending those meetings and getting value out of that process. The value of strong community and partner engagement, as we saw in the Edinburgh process. The value of joint decision making through to resource allocation. That's the connection between scrutiny and community safety in the round. Clearly a value in co-location of opportunities between officers, both in terms of frontline officers and management decision making, would seem to be a direction of travel that many are trying to take on, despite the challenges of change. And a sort of a generic good use of an evidence base and joint assessments before agreeing on joint outcomes. All right. But I suppose the impact and the challenge that we're interested in the year ahead now, given that we've gone through this sort of 2 to 3 year period, lots and lots of work from all concerned to get us to this point. And despite the fact that you see many stories which have maybe a negative view on reform, I think we can pretty safely say that given where we are, it's been pretty good where we've got to. And I often have conversations with civil servants who seem to be worrying about things. And you have to remind them that this is a significant change which has been, on the whole, received very successfully. And that's not just from our point of view. You know, I travel the country, I speak to members involved and I speak to officers involved. It is a generally positive piece. But there are challenges coming up, challenges that we're aware of, all collectively, I think, to work through. How are the local areas managing the strategic agenda and plans? There are a lot of plans in this area of business, from the single outcome agreement to you name it, a lot of plans here. So how is that being managed? Do members have oversight of all of that? Are they understanding the connections? Are they being given time to understand the connections? How is the governance and scrutiny working for Safer and Stronger? Is there a connection? As Councillor Ogilvie mentioned, you know, it's important, we think, that this committee and this scrutiny process has an oversight of safer and stronger communities, not just focusing on the police and fire service's own performance. What are the key challenges for the year ahead? They vary in different places. There will be changes, obviously, they're going to continue. And it's interesting, this week I've been in 3 local authority areas working specifically on their work. And they're all going in slightly different directions. And one, I would say, is alarmingly not moving with the tide, really. So there will be changes. Process mapping is something we're doing. It's a bit complex, but essentially it's a horrible diagram to look at. But what it's telling us is the new arrangements that the police service and the fire service have been asked to do. How is that connecting to the work of the local authority and community planning? Now, it's a diagram that only the interested would be interested in, I suspect. However, there are, when you compare a number of them, you see differences and disconnects. So you see where the services are being asked to do pieces of work is connecting differently with different local authorities. So not just around the plans, but also on their performance, how they're being asked to report on that performance, how the plans are influencing broader community safety work, are members involved at the right levels in the decision making. So it's a technical thing, but we're sharing these with not only with the councils that we worked with on this, but also with anyone that wishes to look at them. And I suppose what's worth saying is quite a number of local authorities are using the reform process to review their own current arrangements. These kind of tools are interesting for them. One of the most basic pieces of the review is we have all these meetings. Do we need all these meetings? Are all these meetings adding value to the process? An example I'll give you, this is an example of a local authority's approach. Not too far from here, I would say. They've taken the view that the reform process has allowed them to address some issues and change. What they wanted to achieve is a broader overview of public protection and safety from a strategic point of view aligning better with the national outcome for community planning. Okay? What they've formed then is a Safer and Stronger Strategy Group, which is a member and officer group, which is quite large because it represents pretty much everything you've got up there at a sort of strategic, tactical approach. So that meeting meets regularly. It reports to full council in terms of providing scrutiny, but it also oversees everything that you see there. So child protection, adult protection, alcohol and drugs, the general work of the police and the fire service, as well as community safety, violence against women. You know, a really strong oversight. What they're also trying to achieve there, and I notice in your own SOA there's a commitment to review your own community safety arrangements as an area. What they're trying to achieve there is a significant degree of joint operational activity and co-location across a range of service providers, which operationalises, it's a phrase, but it's operationalising community planning under the Safer and Stronger agenda. And they're not the only ones. I was in Aberdeen City yesterday, who were doing something almost the same, very similar indeed. So the months ahead for us then, well, as I say, we will refresh the Safer Communities guidance, partly because it's out of date, but also because so much learning has come out of the last year and a half. It will be almost wholly practice-based. Everything that we say will be based and reference to examples of practice. The Safer Communities National Programme Board has been established. Again, it contains members from all of our representative agencies on that board, and we will continue to provide ongoing local support as required. So it's not just about providing briefings, we do intensive training as required, but we're also involved in service provision and service planning with other local colleagues as they see fit. There will be a significant focus on violence reduction and asset-based prevention. We're particularly interested in essentially the work to pull together the different services as well as the government's objectives, strategic objectives, and try and find some common ground there. And I think that's it's happening. It's fine. All right. I've kept it as brief as I could, but I'll happily take questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. Any questions,
Good. Thanks, Chair. Wait till I find the page again. Yeah, you mentioned that the HMI inspection was published and there would be another one next year.
Yeah.
Is it going to be annually on an ongoing basis, or is this a kind of one-off?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm going to meet with HMI senior officers next week to discuss that. The initial feeling was that the inspection the joint inspection was required because it was a significant change, and that it should be followed up within a year to see if once the arrangements are embedded, what change has happened. So that's the only commitment that they've made up to this point. What we have done is taken the recommendations of that report and implemented into the collaborative statement to support members. So the versions that are around for you now include the recommendations of the HMI report.
Are you, Ronnie?
There's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of models, a lot of different approaches, and you're trying to get well, that's a generic thing, but locally based, if I've read it right.
Yes.
Some jargon here I don't understand, but I won't go into that. We were lucky here because being co-terminus, we've always had that committee scrutiny going on for years, all the years I've been involved. So that was one of our strengths, and that's what we put into the Pathfinder through the various officers that attended at a national level. That we are quite a strong model, we felt, because of the co-terminus of this local authority. Some of these things, I just wonder when this committee is going to start looking at some of the things. You know, I see all the local authorities, but there's two. There was Fife and Dumfries and Galloway who were co-terminus. The other ones were joint boards, and so members wouldn't be aware because, you know, on a board there'd only be one or two members from each local authority. And I've often wondered how they disseminated the information back to the other 80, whatever it is in Glasgow. Here we were lucky because it was a 19 committee until recently, it became 11. So there was always a good input from members, and then of course the local area committee. So there was always a good input. looking at all this stuff, when do we as a committee start looking at that to see what you might want from us, or we might want from you if you want? You know, that's what I don't understand is where we are in the process here. You know, I mean, there's a lot of big, high level stuff.
Yeah.
But it's when does it impact on us, or will we be involved to put our tuppence worth in?
Well, I mean, certainly in terms of the work that you describe, all the guidance work that will be produced will be circulated for full consultation. It has to be. Our intention is that it won't just be simply a Scottish Government piece of guidance. It'll be a jointly owned piece of guidance with the services, with COSLA and Solace and so on and so forth. It's a supportive piece because it's non-statutory. So it's a look, here you go, this is what everyone's doing. Adapt it if you wish to whatever you want to use. And that's the point of all this in terms of, you asked the question, when do we get into all this? Well, it's up to you. And that was the point of the Pathfinder, partly, was for you to decide which direction you wanted. And you're right to say that you had a strong arrangement here, because the fundamental principles that we argued for throughout the reform process, both services and a number of others, was that it should be based on good existing practice. And I think what you can see in the Police and Fire Reform Act, this approach, this scrutiny approach, isn't really new to any of us, I would suspect. It's more formal than it used to be, but police and fire colleagues, as well as community safety colleagues, would often and should be well used to talking to members and providing updates and all the rest of it. So, in terms of the direction that you wish to take, there'll be a range of different approaches and models that you'll wish to look at and decide which one's best for yourself. As you did with the work in the Pathfinder. Where did you go? You went to Borders and West Lothian and a number of others to see how they were doing it. Now, what you have, I suppose it's but worth bearing in mind that you were in the minority of areas that bothered to go and do that, to actually go and have a look. We ran those events in Edinburgh periodically where we tried to bring people together so that they would share that information, and to a to a greater degree they were successful because they were very well attended. There's another one next week, in fact. But there is still quite a number of local areas that haven't developed a particular style as yet, and really aren't pushing forward, not in terms of just the local scrutiny, but aren't making the connections between the work that our colleagues do here and the broader piece around public protection and safer communities, which we would think, I think, it's missing an opportunity, and it's also putting maybe unnecessary pressure and focus on the work of our colleagues here without understanding the broader context. But your direction of travel, as you've stated in your single outcome agreement, is to do just that. But there's many that haven't yet.
Thanks, Brian. Graham.
Thanks, Chair. Just on that, is that due to the fact that our strength was in our co-terminosity, as Ronnie said, or was it, and the ones who are not engaging and haven't engaged, is that because they were sort of a couple of members on a bigger board from a local authority and you know, they didn't have the direct contact that we've always had with both our fire and police service?
Different reasons, Councillor, really, in different places. Some of it will be about history, some of it will be, as you describe, some of it, dare I say, is politics in some places, but that would never come into it, I'm sure. But certainly there are different reasons why things have developed differently. On the whole, though, you have to say it's positive in that those arrangements are now all in place. And given that this is a generational piece of change, the fact that they're all in place and beginning to work is a success. How they progress that, we're only 6 months in, will remain to be seen. And it's our role to support that process, which is what we're intending to do and what we're trying to do.
Could I just come back and say that I think Ronnie will agree with me here, in this particular authority, politics has never really come into the Police and Fire Committee. There are one or two committees it does come in.
Sure.
But certainly police and fire planning and things like that are non-political and have always been so, and I hope that they will remain that.
Thank you. The only thing that I was a wee bit disappointed in through the whole process was partnership working. We invited a lot of partners to meetings, and a lot didn't attend. And I know there's a lot of busy people out there that are with agencies and projects and that, but I think it's very important that these services know what partnerships are doing, and partnerships know what they're doing. Yes. And I was disappointed, so I hope in the future that we can get some kind of process that if there's any discussions or platforms for discussion, that we can maybe do a wee bit better job including our local partnerships, because they weren't turning up for these.
I mean, there's no way you can really put your finger on to say why in some areas partners are broadly engaging successfully and why they're not in others. There is, I don't know. You'll find the director of health or the chair of the health board at this meeting in some parts of the country actively engaging, taking part, and in others not so. Now, whether that's because they've been invited or not, I don't know, but it's just the vagaries of why things are developing slightly differently. But the process, the legislative process, allowed things to be different, and intensely. It essentially encouraged people to develop differently. And that was a positive issue, because it made sure that whatever scrutiny you arrive at would fit what you wanted locally. But I suppose it's leading the horse to water job for a lot of this. You can point to examples, you can show practice, you can try and encourage people to discuss with each other their own arrangements, as well as showing exactly how they work. But it's up to colleagues in those areas to decide what's best for them.
Thank you. Yes, Kate?
Try the right one. Just probably to remind Chair and members that when we were doing some of the transition work, that was one of the areas that I was certainly keen in. I know Neville was as well, when we talked about the Road Safety Partnership and some of the other ones, that where we were going to bring forward performance data that was actually not solely within our domain to be as effective as we needed to be. In the case of the exception reporting of where it was very good, I think you rightly should be able to better understand why it's really good, and I don't think it's purely through the enforcement engagement. I think it's about the partnership. Equally, where we are not meeting some of the challenges we've set ourselves, is to understand why that is. Now, whilst you could say it would be so much easier for me if I wasn't sitting here on my own, the simple answer is no, it is easier when you have the people from the different areas, but I think we can't immediately leap to that when we've not been there in the first place. So I think you're right. I think it's about us better explaining to partners what the part is they would play in this scrutiny board, and a lot of it is, the scrutiny is about, with the greatest respect just now, police performance, and maybe it's that progression through to where it's a much more integrated approach that we need to get to. But I think there's a huge danger in jumping to that too quickly, because what will happen is we'll lose all the strength that you talked about earlier and about that police and fire scrutiny. What you want to do is build on it, not somehow diminish it, but actually make it greater, and as I say, make many more people probably I would say accountable, but responsible for giving that explanation to you, which would be a lot more coherent than perhaps I could.
Thanks for that, Kate. Ron, you welcome back.
So thanks, Chair, for that. Just to follow on from what Kate was saying, some of the partner agencies reported through the Community Safety Partnership, and I used to sit on it when I was the chair of the Police and Fire Authority, and I always felt it was too big. And I made that observation here, and there's going to be a review of it. Now, I don't know if it's sat or whatever. I always felt that the partners turned up there, but there's very few member input because it was a bigger committee with a few local authority representatives. I don't know, maybe it's not a question for you, but it's just the way the debate's gone today. The Community Safety Partnership was mentioned in your presentation. I haven't seen any outcomes from the one here, or if it's ever sat since last May, or whatever's happened. I mean, because there's information goes through there that members would appreciate if it's happening. So maybe it's a question for Derek or Claire.
Derek.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the presentation today has certainly been helpful, and I think as a committee we're quite clear that we're on a journey, and we've established the scrutiny arrangements as we set out in the earlier reports. I think the next stages are emerging, and it's quite clear that, particularly with Kate and Neville, that we need to take that forward through the community planning structures, as we've heard earlier from the presentation. In the first instance, that needs to be developed by officers and then in due course brought to the appropriate committees of the Council, particularly Policy and Resources Committee, noting the comments that members have made about the Community Safety Partnership. And we'll certainly take that on board today. There's been a lot of useful information come out of the presentation. It allows us to take a sort of benchmark of where we've got to within Dumfries and Galloway at this point, and now where we might want to go in the future on that journey. And clearly members have got a key part to play in that. It will also feature as part of the Review of Schemes Subcommittee, and the impetus for that's now gaining momentum, and quite clearly there's a report due before full council before the end of this calendar year. So a number of work streams in place just to reassure members that these are progressing, and today has provided a helpful insight into the different approach we may take going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
We okay with that? Right. I'd just like to thank Richard for coming down today and giving us that, and we'll let him escape now. That was very interesting, thanks Richard. Item 7, Dumfries and Galloway Fire and Rescue Service Revenue Budget 2012-13. Final Outturn report by Assistant Chief Officer, could I ask Neville?
Yep, the Outturn report is for the 2012-2013, and it's really to sort of set, that's what happened. We've moved on to the new organisation now, and it's really for this committee to look at that report, ask any questions they wish on it. I'll try and answer them the best I can. But I think it's particularly evident what's there about the operational underspends, where the overspends were spent and why they were spent, rather than the report. So I'm quite happy to answer any questions.
Members, any questions? Run it.
Just one that jumps out is the operational staff, the underspend. Is that you're running short of full-time? Is that full-time, or does that include the retained?
That's due to operational activity, because if you tie that in with the public performance report that you'll see later, that 2012-13 was an exceptionally low year for incidents, and it's really against retained wages and operational incidents.
Are there any other questions?
If there was a underspend because of low incidents, why is there an overspend in transport?
The overspend in transport takes into consideration that we went in through fire reform, and we kept a check on this, that we actually spent quite a few £1,000s in fuel costs running up and down to Perth on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, working on fire reform, because a lot of officers from this local area are trying to keep an eye on how the National Fire Service run and how we integrate into that. So there's a lot more business meetings than there ever were, because the business meetings were outside the area. Secondly, part of that transport costs were associated with the large aerial platform that we secured for Stranraer, which was always one of the sort of things we tried to do over years, and we never actually managed it. But that became a financial, basically it was a saving, because we got it for £1, but we had to spend about £40,000 and bring it up to scratch to be able to put it in there. So we got £400,000 fire appliance for £1 at that time. So some of the overspend on one side actually gave us a better service in a different area of the organisation.
Could I just come back? It's much appreciated in Stranraer, by the way, but it's the old story. You know, it's a lot further from Perth to Dumfries than it is from Dumfries to Perth. So people should have been able to come a bit further down the road to meet with you and save some money. I don't see why Dumfries and Galloway Fire Service should have been paying for that, but anyway, that's another matter.
Okay, any further questions? Are members happy to note all recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Item 8, Dumfries and Galloway Fire and Rescue Service Capital Budget 2012-13 Outturn Report by Assistant Chief Officer. Neville.
Just to say on this one that all the projects that were agreed through the Police and Fire Committee over the year were completed by the end of the financial year. And I think you all got the opportunity to go and look at the Operational Development Centre out at Garaclonin, and where I think you saw in the last report, there's £107,000 put across into the capital to support that. It means that we've got a fantastic local training facility to carry on local training and to ensure that our staff can carry on the capabilities against the risks that we've got in the local area. From having the working at height tower to the centre itself, the road traffic accident area, and the new carbonaceous fire training unit, which gives them realistic fire training. So that's where the capital spending, majority of that was spent on that, and the upgrade, or finalising the upgrade of Thornhill Fire Station.
Ronnie.
Totally appreciate what you've said there, Neville. It's going forward. Will you agree your capital projects have to be done through the centre now, as it were? Or do you get a sum of money that you can tailor-make your own local arrangements out of capital? We don't know how that's going to work yet. I don't, anyway. If you understand my question, because I didn't.
I was at a meeting last week. We had a presentation from the property manager for the West area, and I saw within that we've done a property survey of all our properties in Dumfries and Galloway. We have put forward where the spends are required in the future. That is looked at by the property manager and the group up in the West area, and places like Moffat and Gatehouse have been already identified as upgrades to the front of upgrades to their stations. So we are involved in that. We're involved from a different perspective. I don't, like I had before, was the sort of my fingers in the financial pie to be able to direct the Police and Fire Committee on where we should spend the money. At the moment, this is a central funding that is set with the whole property group, where there's an the head of asset management looks across the whole of the organisations. They do an annual inspection of all stations, and where the priorities are required to be dealt with, that goes through that group, and then we get from that works done. From the other point of view, I've only heard yesterday that we've got 2 brand new fire engines coming to Dumfries and Galloway, something I didn't know was going to happen, but they looked at the fleet across the whole of the organisation, and we had 2 of the older fire engines. My concerns originally, and I think it was the concerns of this committee, that our good appliances would end up in Central Belt, and we'd end up with something slightly older. In fact, actually, they proved the opposite. We've actually getting 2 brand new ones to replace our 2 oldest ones. So it's actually getting fairly divvied up. So I'm quite happy with the direction of that.
Any further questions, Graham?
Thanks, Chair. Hallelujah to your last statement. You spent $713,000 on Cargan Bridge between the carbonaceous, is that the right word? No, carbonaceous training unit and the development centre. How often is that used, and is it used by outside? Well, people coming from outside Dumfries and Galloway, other fire services to use it, or is it just purely for Dumfries and Galloway? It's the first thing. Fleet replacement programme, $149,000 you spent, no problem with that, but can expand on that, what you got for your $149,000?
Without the actual programme in front of me, but I'll try and answer both questions. Yes, the Operational Development Centre is part of, it's the annex of the main campus for the West area. It is mostly for local training, but we do run specialist training courses within the area, things like urban search and rescue, road traffic collision, where there are firefighters closer to this area, say the Ayrshires or South Lanarkshire, that haven't kept up their carbonaceous training record, or they come back from ill health, we've run a course, then we'll take them on our course here. So yes, it's a shared service across the whole of the West area. The second question on the spend of the 149,000, I don't want to talk off the top of my head, but there was a number of light fleet vehicles that were purchased, as in replacement of cars for community safety. There was a couple of vans for training to ensure that we've got vehicles capable of taking the equipment around the stations to do the training on. And there's 2 brand new 4x4s for the rural areas that were bought. One to replace one that had an accident, and the other one to support rural areas for things like forestry, fires, etc. So.
Any further questions? You note the recommendations? Thank you. Great. Item 9, Dumfries and Galloway Fire and Rescue Service Draft Public Performance Report 2012-2013, report by the local senior officer. The Draft Public Performance Report 2012-13 for the final year of the Dumfries and Galloway Fire and Rescue Service has been produced to advise members of performance against key targets and indicators, including the achievement of objectives identified in Change Management Framework 2012-13. Neville, have you any further to add to the report?
The report's there. I would suggest it's looked at in a year that we had significant reductions in most areas of fires. I've written up quite a bit to say about it, but I think members have probably have read through most of it themselves and heard probably a previous presentation from Hamish on his move to the new service. But I think I probably still want to say a couple of words on things like some of the performance areas that were significantly good, and a few of the things that I want to move forward in the new organisation. Things like, and this is a touch wood, we've been very lucky in the last 2 or 3 years that we had no fire fatalities in Dumfries and Galloway, and that is a touch wood one that I hope I'm not cursing it. We had the second lowest rate of accidental fires in Scotland. We had a 50% reduction of antisocial behaviour type incidents, which includes things like deliberate fires, small fires, and hoax fires and attacks on firefighters. The call reduction team managed to reduce the number of unwanted fire calls across the area, and that's one of the areas I want to take forward, because I think I've said before, 50% of our call-outs to false alarms and automatic fire alarms, which are unwanted and unnecessary movements of fire appliances. So there's a big savings in that area to be able to deliver better services in the rest of the front line. From 2003, you had 17,000 home fire safety checks. We've got a target now of 1,000 a year, but then to go on from that 1,000 is about targeting the most vulnerable and most at risk, but everybody's offered a home fire safety check if they want it. We had the lowest number of incidents last year and the last 3 years on bonfire night, and we're coming into that bonfire season, so hopefully that'll move forward on that. There are a lot of areas of this report that talks about good partnership working, which we mentioned slightly before. Things like the working with the community wardens, working with Operation Safety, which is ongoing this week with the P7s from all the local schools. The schools programme that we run out nationally on people that help us. Big role for people going off to university. Young citizen schemes that actually take people away from antisocial behaviour and actually give make good citizens in the local areas. The hit and run theatre and the Safe Drive Stay Alive to the 16 and 17-year-olds going up the roads. So there's some examples of the kind of things that we did in the past service that we are going to take forward jointly into this service. These things are already ongoing and they will be planned into the future. I think the other couple of areas I just wanted to mention is the significant move forward in health and safety within the Fire and Rescue Service, from the point of view that no RIDDR incidents, their incidents which is reporting of injuries, dangerous disease and dangerous occurrences regulations, which means that where a firefighter is off the run for more than 3 days because of an accident or injury, or that there's a significant incident that happens. We've had none of them, which is another touch wood, but we're moving forward on that. We've reduced on-duty accidents, reduced near misses, and reduced acts of violence against employees. So there's a lot of good news stories in the public performance report from 2012-13. And I'd probably commend it to yourselves. It's going out to our library so that the public see where we were. And I'm not suggesting that it should be a benchmark document, but it gives you a kind of where we were. And if we look at that and then we move forward and we take the best parts of that and we carry on working with the bigger organisation where I've got some more resources from community safety side of things, I've got more resources from an operational point of view, and the opportunities to get higher level resources from the larger previous service areas to support the projects locally down here. So I'm commending that report to you as a good report that's been there, and it's a move forward now. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Now we'll run it.
Yeah, and I would say it looks very well. You know, if you look at all the performance indicators here, and I'm glad you mentioned a baseline, because what we argued in the Pathfinder, what we argued in the previous committee was, when Dumfries and Galloway doesn't exist anymore, we need to keep up the good practice from both services, so we've got a benchmark to say where we, you know, how the national one was. So that's good, and this historic data has proven that. On a specific question, you mentioned radar, and it was in relation to the retained. If somebody who's a retained guy hurts himself, but then he's off work, you know, his employer then would report it, or would you report it? It's okay for the full-time ones because it is employed by yourselves, but when somebody's retained, they may have an employment elsewhere. How does the radar rules apply there?
The report of the incident is where the incident happens and what the person was doing at the time of the incident. So if it's a fire-related incident where it's working for us, then we'd report that radar incident. If it was his own work and that takes him away from our other work, then it'd be reported at his own work.
Thanks, Ronnie. Graham.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking through the performance indicators, and there's only 2 reds. And sorry, there's various things in here which, although they come up as a red or an amber, you have not really got any control over them. You can't legislate how many road accidents there will be or how many fire casualties there will be. I mean, these are things that you just have to respond to them. So I think it's unfair to give you a red star or a red whatever it is when you don't have control over those. Yes, you have some control over the training or the information to people to take precautions and make sure they don't get themselves into that situation. And the other one, can you explain to me what whole-time light duties rate is, please?
Yeah, I'll take it. Talking about the control of them, you're absolutely right. We probably don't have control of them, but we have an influence from, as you said, from the education point of view. And I think what this gives us is a target to see that is our education programs, is the Safe Drive Stay Alive campaign, is the work with the partnership, with the Road Safety Partnership, have an effect on the figures that we're actually seeing here. So that gives us a standard to look against. Because if we don't record that kind of information, how would we know that we're actually making a difference? The fire casualties one, it's interesting because we're not seeing people going to hospital severely burnt. What we're doing is we're seeing a lot more people getting cautionary checkups, and the cautionary checkups are then recorded in here as, because we call a fire casualty somebody that's come out of fire that has been coughing, spluttering some smoke. It doesn't mean they're actually dying. It means that they've had some kind of ill effect from that fire. Therefore, they are a fire casualty. So that precautionary checkup when they go back to hospital is recorded as a statistic. So the way we started recording statistics slightly differently shows that one as a red now, because it looks like we've got more fire casualties than we had previously. But it's really when you look at the evidence and actually how many people are actually seriously burned or injured in an incident would be probably a better statistic for us to see what the effect of home fire safety checks are. The second question, when you asked about the light duties, in the past, we didn't really, it's only latterly we've actually been through the occupational health, bringing people back to meaningful work while they're still not fit for operational duties. So there's a standard that we have to meet for an operational firefighter, but they can also do other work before coming back to fitness. So you'll see that we've had an improvement in the area of people with sick days, lost ridership sick days. It's gone up. That's because the people have come back into meaningful employment, so they're not sick anymore, but they're back in light duties. So there's been an increase in light duties. So what may look like a bad mark is not a bad mark, it's actually quite a good mark. If it sounds a bit back to front, but.
Okay, members? Happy with the recommendations? Thank you. Item 10, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service quarterly performance report, April-June 2013. Report again by the local senior officer. This is to advise about Fire and Rescue Services performance against the key targets and indicators which form part of the Fire Authority's interim local plan 2013-14 for the period April to June 2013. Neville, yeah.
I'm looking at the report. I'm just saying you'll probably say the opposite because there's a lot of red areas since we moved into the new single fire and rescue service. But when you look at what those red areas are, part of it was a lot to do with special services because we had that the flooding in Newton Stewart, which never happened in the last 50 years, and the number of rescues were carried out there. So the areas of special services and special service rescues and special casualties increased because of a climatic event rather than anything that generally happened. But if you look, the performance indicator I still look at is the 5-year trend is still on an improvement in all the areas, even though that quarter year against quarter year from last year to this year looks like we've actually got some reds in some of them areas. So the part on fires increased small fires. We had an incident up in the Sanker-Keller home area with a lot of small fires being lit by a number of individuals, and we put in a community action team went in that area, worked with the local education, worked with the local groups, and it almost stamped it out almost straight away. We never got another incident after that. It's either that or it started raining the week later. I'm not too sure which worked the best, but it hasn't reoccurred right through the summer. So that work that had gone in with the local partners seemed to have made an effect in that area. I think the other part of the report I'd just like to say is that what it demonstrates in quite a bit of it is that partnership working, the things that I said would carry on are carrying on, we're reporting them here, and we're actually diversifying into a lot of the areas of the single outcome agreement that may not be fire directly related. It's things like, if you look at the first page, drowning prevention, something that's very new, but it's also a very real risk in the area, which is surrounded by water, a number of lochs and rivers and things like that, that we as a fire and rescue service have got an expertise in swift water rescue and flooding, and we can actually use that expertise to assist other partners in actually driving down some of the other sort of risks in the area. So I commend this as a report that tells you a state of the nation for the first 3 months of the year, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Members?
No, you're right, and you've explained the reds. It looks, but you've explained that away. It's funny, you're victims of climate change, if you believe in climate change or not. For many years we had wet summers, and then so it was flooding and stuff. This year it's people drowning because they're cooling off because it's hot. Maybe not so much in Dumfries and Galloway, but nationally you saw it on the TV where people were trying to dive into freezing cold reservoirs and unfortunately drowning. So it's just a specific question. When I was in Mallorca, it was 91 degrees. My son texted to say Annan's flooded, and some of you guys come in for a bit of criticism at a public meeting we were at because they were pumping out what people perceive was the wrong end of a street. But he gave a good explanation. Does that get you know, in the statistics, does that get marked down as, you know, you have to attend, obviously the guys were there. How does that recorded? You know, you mentioned something that made me think. Is it special services? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. We prior to this, we made a big plea that this format stayed and this publication stayed because it was welcomed across the region, community council and everybody, because it's easy to read and it gives us a benchmark from the previous quarter. And I'm glad this is still happening because I find that might go away as a cost saving.
All right, Graham?
Due to the dry summer, I would have thought we might have had an awful lot more of moorland and grass fires. Now, I see you had an outbreak up in Nisdale area, but is there any particular reason that you can think of why we didn't have a lot more? Because it was an exceptionally good summer in this part of the world.
The issues usually for us from an outbreak of fires is usually in the March, April time of the year, because that's when the sap in the plants haven't risen and you've always got that white sort of grass across the top. And I think if you remember, that's when we had the incidents right at the beginning of the year, and then we got a small spell of rain and that allowed that to be dampened down. And then what happens next is the sap comes back through and the grass gets greener and it's a lot more difficult to light. And I think and partially I think there's a bit of work that we've done with the Forestry Commission and a lot of the different landowners about controlled burning and muir burning and getting that muir burn code across better so they're actually controlled better, so we're not called out to incidents of muir burning that's got out of control. So from a couple of years ago, I think you remember the Criffle incident, the significant fires on top of Criffle with some of the muir burn that got out of control that gave us a couple of days of incidents. I think some of that message is getting across because we're working with the landowners as well prior to the actual burning season.
Okay, I'll just come back, Chair. So education in that respect has been very successful. If I could think back to, you said March, April, 23rd of March, you couldn't have lit a fire with a 20-gallon can of petrol because we were up to our ears in snow at that particular point, which was very unusual as well. Did you people get involved in that at any time, or was it just police and sort of roads departments?
From a point of view of working with the local emergency planning group and the SCG, yes, we're involved in what we put in place to be able to get our firefighters and fire appliances to incidents if we're called out. From a point of view of having to take any actual action at the time, no, we're very, very fortunate that we didn't have to take any action in them areas.
Yes, Ryan.
One thing it can't capture, and you mentioned it quite a few times in different reports about education, you know, so the young drivers, I think this primary servants, operation safety, talking to landowners about controlled burning, other things like that. How do you, so preventative work stops, so the statistics go down because you're doing all this preventative work and education, you know, smoke alarms and meeting with the vulnerable groups and all the stuff that you've done over the years. How do we capture that? Because if you look at a raw statistic, you say, well, we don't need as many fire service people because your statistics are, you know, but you're doing all this stuff that's unseen to the public eye or captured in a format like this. So how do you balance the two? If you put evidence, you know, so the narrative round about your statistics is, well, we're doing all this preventative stuff, we know about it, but the wider audience and maybe government might not know. How do we capture that?
I think that's what's going to come out of the, I mean, this is the way we capture it currently locally. I think this is what's going to come out of the plans that you'll see in the future and the reporting of them plans in the future. We'll have the statistics and we'll have the preventative measures below each of the statistics to show what work was done to either reduce them statistics or what work will be planned to try and reduce the statistics in the future. And that's the kind of setup, the new templates that will come out. So I'll try and keep a lot of this but also what you should get is an actual a template that shows you there's the statistic, there's the actions that would take to try and reduce it, and the next time round this is what happens. So if there's something's been put in place like the operation safety, for example, and we see a reduction in some of the antisocial behaviour areas and things like that, then that programme will go against that reduction. But that programme would have been put in place because we had an issue to start with, because it was a risk. So we're trying to sort of, what you've just said, try to actually put the cause and the response in the same paragraph so you can see what the effects one to the other are.
Okay, just on the...
Thanks, Chair. In the past, you have run or assisted with your colleagues in the police the young driver scheme. There was a very emotive, moving demonstration put on, which I attended I attended in Stranraer, and I think it travelled across, which was the result of a fatality with young actors, and it was a joint thing. Have you still got a budget to be able to promote that? Because that really was moving, and it really brought home to people what was the effects that something like that could have on families and on just the general community. Have you still got a budget to be able to run those things?
I'm glad you've asked that question. That's a challenge for Kate and I for the future, but it's also a challenge that we'll probably set for the Community Safety Partnership to look at some of them areas. Yes, we have got some central funding for some of these type activities, and I think you've got a paper further down on today's agenda, if it's still on the agenda, that may help us deal with some of them kind of issues and move them forward. Because without going into that paper, some of the suggestions are that there are opportunities for match funding to carry out these type of activities and make them carry on in the future. Because we have seen certainly a reduction in the number of young driver casualties. So one of the emerging ones, I think Kate will probably agree with me, one of the emerging ones now is actually fatalities within the elderly drivers. So it gives us another aspect to start looking at and seeing what kind of funding arrangements we need to look at to try and deal with them kind of activities that go on.
Okay, ma'am. Just now, you mentioned the situation up in Nisdale last year, and I think the unfortunate thing is up there we've got residential schemes with so much open space within them, and I think I'd just like to say about the retained firemen that attend these. It's unbelievable the response times of guys that are out doing their daily business and get called up, not knowing what they're going to, but the way they deal with these incidents when they get there. And I'd just like to note that it's really appreciated the work they do there. I can't believe the response times, at times, the professionalism that they've got for part-time officers.
Thank you, Chair, for your comments. I'll pass it on to the crews in Sanka. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Recommendations. Members are asked to note the performance of the service over the period April to June 2013 as detailed in the fireworks document. Agreed? Thank you. Item 11. Police Revenue Budget 2012-13 Final Outturn Report by Divisional Commander. This report provides members with the final Police Revenue Budget Outturn position for financial year 2012-13. Kate, have you anything to add to the report?
The report is obviously, as you see, we've tried to lay it out in a way that's explained where there are overspend, underspends, to give it a bit of context. I would submit it to the committee and say that if I can just ask Superintendent Galloway, who was responsible for pulling it together, maybe just to give a quick overview for you, just to give you some further context.
Chair, I'd just add the highlights that we have a positive outturn position of an underspend of £518,000. That's been achieved through a number of ways, primarily through very close management and oversight, both by the Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary Force and also this the previous committee here that we provided regular updates to throughout the year. Most of our underspend, our largest underspend, was in police staff costs, which was really taking a very close look at the opportunities to secure savings over that tight financial period by not filling vacant posts. Some of our overspends were as a result of having to send officers to the London 2012 Olympics, although we did recover full recovery costs as a result of that, so it wasn't to the detriment of the local area. This also allowed us to address some emerging overspend costs, particularly around about rising fuel costs. And there was an increase in, again, officers travelling out with the region over the last 12 months as we approached the reform process. And we had a number of officers, including myself, attached to national reform teams. Some of the underspend as well also allowed us to bring forward one or two areas that we wanted to do, such as the high visibility clothing and the covers for our body armour, and also provide a one-off payment which was previously approved by this committee to the Police Treatment Centre at Outturn because of the service that we get from there. The committee will be aware that in future that national scrutiny of the revenue budgets will fall to the Scottish Police Authority. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Paul Garrett and his team within Dumfries and Galloway Council for the excellent assistance they've given us over the piece in relation to our budgets and the management of those. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Members? Run it.
Neville mentioned it, and it's mentioned in the report that a proposed application for funding support putting the 500 is in another part of the agenda. So I don't know if we talk about it now, but if, as you, sorry, let's look at Neville then. International, there's cost savings to be made, and we're asking to have a fund, which I would totally agree with, so we can do these things. And maybe you can't answer this, but I'll ask the question anyway. Because there's pressure on to save money, would that then be sort of scooped back, or are we within our rights here to identify this and keep it here? Maybe that's a big question, but you know, it's fundamental, I think.
No, not at all. The Police and Fire Reform Act allowed for underspends to be divided between the Scottish Government and the local authority. The Scottish Government to receive 51% and local authorities 49%. Now, if you see at 3.1.4 of the report, you'll notice that the Scottish Government's actually got less money back than what the Council have got. And you think, why is that? It's because of a £62,000 costs, which were agreed through the Government to fund staff severance costs on the run-up to reform. That's why they show slightly less. So we're perfectly entitled to take the 554,000 and combine that with the previous spend as well. And that goes into the local authority report that you'll hear later on. And that's not something that government can touch.
Graham, did you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. Just employee costs, police officers, £125,000 overspend. Was this overtime or whatever? Supplies and services, £150,000 overspend. Could you maybe explain that to me? There's less of them about.
Certainly the majority of the police officer costs were a mixture of overtime. We had a number of serious crime operations towards the tail end of the financial year, which has caused some additional pressures. I would point out that the London Olympics is lumped in there, but that we did get full cost recovery subsequently from that. But that's why that is showing an overspend. You're quite rightly identifying the supplies and services that because of underspends elsewhere, that allowed us to bring forward a number of equipment purchases that perhaps we wouldn't have been able to before, and that's primarily as the high visibility clothing and also changes to our body armour replacement programme and also the covers that are required for the body armour. That wasn't as a result of police reform, that was as a result of the body armour coming to the end of its useful life. And that's the reasons why there's an overspend shown there, but that's taken from underspends elsewhere within the budget.
Graham, did you have a question?
No, I think a forced contingency. Could you explain that more fully to me, please?
Force contingency is a contingency that we have in the event of there are unforeseen events happen. We usually have, in terms of the budget, there's usually two. There's a Chief Superintendent's Contingency Fund, which is very much about operational delivery. So it might be if we're running specific events or operations that require a bit of additional funding onto the specific departmental or divisional budget. Forced contingency was one that was for the wider, where it wasn't just purely about operational, but we had a contingency fund that allowed us that if there was a big event or there was some major incident, that we would be able to tap into that fund in order to cover any of the budgetary costs that came in. As it was, you can see that significant policing operation we used to move funds in the areas of need. So where we had moves everywhere else, we didn't have such a drain on it. But the whole point was, in a lot of cases, it would not be the Chief Superintendent that would be allowed to allocate that. It would come down to the Chief Officers who would allocate that funding elsewhere and approve that budgetary movement.
Any further questions? Members happy to note recommendations? Thank you. Item 12, Police Capital Programme 2012-13, final outturn report by Divisional Commander. This report provides my members with details of where capital funds were spent during the financial year 2012-13. Kate, have you anything to add?
No, again, I think this is probably a far more concise report and outlines very clearly where we chose to make some capital spends on. Again, a lot of them were driven by health and safety. When you see the usage that we had of custody or the kind of upgrading of custody, but equally through this committee, we obviously had the upgrade of Castle Douglas Police Station, which again was required in order to meet some of the accessibility issues that had been raised previously. But again, I'm quite happy to again defer to Superintendent Galloway just to provide a further overview on specific areas, Chair.
Certainly, Chair, throughout the year there was regular reports put to this committee and also an agreement to take forward one or two projects that perhaps weren't forecast at the beginning of the year. The major spends were on the refurbishment and upgrade of Castle Douglas Police Station, the completion of the major incident room within the divisional headquarters, and the upgrading of the cell provision at both Lorburn Street Police Station and at Stranraer. Basically, the budget came in line what was projected throughout the year, and as I say, was agreed by this committee at the regular updates that were provided. Again, on a future national basis, the Scottish Police Authority are responsible for the oversight of this, and I can already state that we are getting capital budget allocations into Dumfries and Galloway, and indeed our next major project is refurbishment and upgrade of Sanquhar Police Station, which we are hopeful will commence in January 2014, and there's a 10-week work schedule for that. And there's other things that have been looked at just now. Again, I think it'd be remiss of me not to thank this committee for the management and oversight of this, or the previous committee, sorry, for the management and oversight. And I think it's left Dumfries and Galloway in a very, very healthy way in relation to the excellent estate that we have across the region.
Thanks. Questions? Graham, you first this time.
There's no a big choice, but the quality is good. Carbon management initiatives. Have you thought of photovoltaic cells on the top of the police stations as a carbon management initiative to reduce your carbon management, to reduce your carbon footprint, firstly? suggestion I would put forward was that you get smaller police cars with more economical engines that don't go so fast so they can't catch me. But these are things which, are you looking at them, and is there capital available to do these things?
Yes, absolutely. We've done an extensive programme of heating and lighting upgrades, which allows us to be far more economical within our buildings. We have looked at the insulation within a number of the buildings. We already run electric vehicles within our fleet. You know, so these are things that we take forward. Very much our staff are heavily involved in that whole kind of project, but the capital project allows us to take forward the kind of bigger things. Lighting being one of the biggest that we've done in a number of stations now, and it's almost that kind of spend to save, because it is far more economical than the old stuff we had.
Right.
No, I welcome the report and I like the narrative, you know, it explains everything. Just a question on the vehicles. A couple of years ago, there was a conscious decision to buy silver rather than white because there was a better retail value. Is there any evidence of that? Because everybody seems to want a white car these days. I think it's the most awful colour. You know, every car you see now is white. It frightens me because I think it's a police car. But, no, but seriously, is this the silver car choice reaping the rewards we thought it would?
I think it is. It'll ebb and flow, to be honest, but what they were finding is latterly people didn't actually want a white, and probably what they want is glacier white, not the slightly creamy white that they get by the time our cars are ready to go, to be honest, Councillor Ogilvie. But there's certainly an indication that silver cars retain their popularity, and probably when they're then debadged, destriped, you don't have some of the same markings that are left or the discoloration, so therefore are a much more attractive option. I'm not sure, I can probably try and find out kind of in some extent the percentage of improved resale, but I think a lot of it is about how they then present, because some of the, you'll appreciate, some of the older cars perhaps didn't quite look their best, whereas the silver cars can maybe mask some of the markings.
Graham?
Just for information, I happened to be speaking to a garage the other day, and he said 2 or 3 years ago, if you'd brought in a white car second hand, it was worth £500 less than a normal silver car or a blue car or whatever. Nowadays, as Ronnie says, a vast number of the cars that you see on the road are white. So it's now an acceptable colour, but Ronnie's right, you begin to wonder who it is.
Can I just say, Chair, finally, there's no likelihood that we will probably get electric vehicles for the main road patrol routes, Councillor Nicholl, so unfortunately I can't give you that assurance.
Any further questions, members?
Just to welcome the recognition that the committee, you know, had a good programme of refurbishment. And I know George isn't here now, but he was so happy when we got the Castle Douglas one done. So just the thanks for that recognition.
Yes, I'll echo that, Ronnie. Turn to recommendations. Members are asked to note capital expenditure of 1,800,000, whatever it is, during financial year 2012-13. Sorry, we're getting tongue-tied there. Item 13, Dumfries and Galloway Police and Fire Services Reserve Report by Director Chief Executive Service. This report asks members to note the proposals for the use of reserves 929k remained by the Council in relation to the former Dumfries and Galloway Police and Fire Services. I think Elsa Freeman's going to speak to this report. Thanks, Elsa.
Thank you. The report that for members' consideration today details the proposals for the use of the reserves retained by the Council in relation to the former DG, Police and Fire and Rescue Services. The proposals were developed in consultation with Kate and Neville and the Community Safety Partnership Lead Officer Group and are supported by the Community Planning Executive Group. There are 3 proposals detailed within the report covering public space CCTV, multi-agency tasking and coordinating regarding perpetrators of domestic abuse and the establishment of a community capital fund. I don't have anything further to add to the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ailsa. Graham?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's in relation to the CCTV situation. Whithorn, which is in the South Machars, has been trying to get a CCTV system for some considerable time, and Stephen Stiff, when he was inspector in Newton Stewart, was pushing for that, because at that particular time there were a lot of problems in Whithorn with sort of antisocial behaviour, and it was felt that being sort of 17 or 20 miles from the nearest police station, there was a definite need for it in the Whithorn area, so that, you know, it could be, there were other issues, and the Newton Stewart one was needing upgraded, so they were going to put together a scheme, and it came to quite a lot of money, actually. And it's never happened, and there's no sign of it in this particular report, so I just wondered if there was any chance that some of this money could be sort of earmarked. I mean, they looked at a lot of methods of funding this, and at the time it fell in stony ground. They had some money from area committee, but that got taken back in and redistributed. So I'm just interested to know if there's any chance of that ever happening.
Yes, well, we are aware of that. What we've looked at the moment is the existing CCTV systems and the development of a CCTV strategy based on a needs assessment. And we would be looking, as well as the 11 standalone systems that we have at the moment, we would be looking at the other areas where they don't exist at the moment and how they could be brought in, and ways that they could be brought into this stage one if necessary, if it was felt it was necessary. But we obviously would be doing that in consultation with community groups and with the police on a needs assessment basis.
I can just assure you, you'll be pushing an open door if you get down into South Machars. But I would urge you to certainly look at that, because it is a remote area. It is 20 miles from the nearest police station. There aren't a big number of officers on duty at certain times in the day or night in that area, and there has been a lot of antisocial behaviour. A lot of folk think that the law stops at the Bladnoch Bridge, well, it doesn't, but we've got to try and enforce what we can in that area. And I mean, the local officers have done a good job, but a little bit of help would certainly be a help. So I would be welcomed, and I would urge you to certainly look at the South Machars as a possible use of that. Okay?
Ronnie? Thanks, Graham.
Just to follow on, there's two questions just to follow on from Graham, and to put your mind at rest. It actually mentioned Sankar Kirkconnell, Chair, so you won't have to mention them. Sorry, I hear what you said to the answer, Graham, but I read somewhere that there's a mobile system being, I can't remember, it's this paper of something I've read recently, that we're considering a mobile CCTV. Now, I know at Area Committee in Annandale and Eskdale, Sean Marshall and myself proposed that be looked at a couple of years ago, because Cumbria or Carlisle Constabulary had a successful, you mount it on a lamppost, or I know there's some on vans, but that's a bit more obvious if you get a small, and I just wonder if that would be considered for hotspots. You know, you don't always, antisocial behaviour sort of flares and dies down, depends, because there's interventions and stuff like that. So that's my first question. The second question follows on to that, actually, and it was it's like the second recommendation about the multi-agency tasking and coordinating administration. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, with regard to the mobile systems, we'll be certainly looking at the deployment of those as an alternative, as you say, for hotspots. But we need to look at the wireless transmission systems and the recording of that, and who has access to those images, and it would be on a needs basis. But yeah, we'll certainly be looking to bring those into the equation.
Can I just add to what Ailsa said about the CCTV? We did consider using that following the murder in Ecclefechan recently, but some of the challenge was exactly that, the connection, the wireless connection, and therefore the quality of the CCTV. So you may put it up, but actually it wouldn't deliver what you wanted it to do, just because of the location and where it was. We did come up with another alternative which was helpful, but again, that's what informational feedback, and we fed back into Ailsa, and it is just about making sure there's no point in promising you having a mobile CCTV if actually it either doesn't work or the quality is so poor it doesn't actually give you any reasonable feedback. So we're feeding that in as we go along as well. The MATAC is a multi-agency tasking and coordinating meeting. It's designed to focus on offenders who commit violent offences against partners primarily, and we have actually started using it. We've already had an individual who's appeared in court on numerous, and I'm talking numerous charges against a number of former partners. The idea being, rather than dealing with, for instance, domestic cases on a case-by-case, you actually focus on the offender, you do all the background into them, and what we found is, you'll not be surprised, is invariably there have been previous partners who have been subject to abuse that may not have ever reported it to any other agencies. So it's very much about, rather than, whereas the MARAC, which is mentioned there, the Risk Assessment Conference, is about focusing on the victim to make sure that they are given all the help and support they need. The MATAC is about very much looking at the offender, trying to track their, where possible, lines of evidence are, because you know how difficult these are to get them through court and convicted in court where they have been very aggressive and very violent towards partners. What we've found is we've started with the high tariff offenders, so those people that they're very much, it sounds bad, but targeted, because we've identified them through a number of incidents. So they're coming off our local information and incident logs. They go into the domestic abuse investigations team. They do a lot of the work, pulling other partners, and what we're doing is trying to there's a lot of admin to do with that, which is one of the posts, but the other part is advocacy for the victim of crime who's come forward to us. As you'll appreciate, I wouldn't like to take on some of the big organisations if I was sitting there on my own feeling pretty isolated and pretty hard done to. And I think it's quite an intimidating process coming in and dealing with agencies, and also then trying to get your life back on track and be strong enough to be able to stand up against individuals who are abusing you. So the advocacy service has been operating in Glasgow for some time. And it's a group of people who specialise in providing that specialist support to victims of fairly sustained and serious abuse. And all it does is it empowers the victims of this type of crime. Empowers them to make decisions about their own life, because sometimes it's a lonely place, and it acts as a coordination for the other agencies who are maybe providing additional support to them. And it's proven to be really, really useful and supportive, not merely when to get through whatever the criminal justice process is, but actually to get them so they don't then sadly reappear, as we see with some, with a different partner, and they become the victim a second time. So it's about joining all that together and saying we need to bring these people in at an early stage when we're discussing them, so we can start building that model round about protecting the victim, and for the enforcement agencies, quite rightly, tackling the offender.
That was a pretty comprehensive answer. Just one thing that strikes me, if you're going to trail back to get evidence, that will include the health service. So if somebody's presented themselves with injuries that are associated with domestic violence, you'd want that evidence as well. So I take it the doctors and GPs and hospital staff are on board as part of this group, are they?
Because as adults, we have a right to our own privacy. Where we start with is the victim, and what we will tell them very honestly is where we think there will be evidence that we can gather, and what you do is you seek their support for it. There will be very few cases where we would take unilateral decision to take action when the victim wasn't on board. But as you can imagine, when their life's at risk, we'll do that, and we will actually go forward. So the other partner agencies, as you can imagine, we're working through not only Adult Support and Protection Team and Committee, but also through the Domestic Abuse Violence Against Women Partnership and any other relevant group to tap into it. And we've certainly got their support to take this forward. The only one who probably, if I'm being honest, would top trump this is where there is a child protection issue. Child protection has primacy, but there is a natural multi-agency group that would be discussing that anyway, and all we would do would be bolt onto it and build into it. So it's about using the existing partnerships that are there, but this is very much a meeting that focuses on the offender, which is probably quite new for us because it's always previously been about a support to victim to get them out of the situation. For us, it's about us taking action. If we know they're abusing people, we know they're committing criminal acts, then the responsibility is on us to actually take some action.
One final thing, to put this in context, you look at the request for a couple of staff. I don't know how many domestic violence issues there are in Dumfries and Galloway. I can't remember off the top of my head anyway. So putting this in context, is that enough staff requirement to meet the demand? Or is it just the first tranche?
It's probably there are a number of incidents, but what we've done is carefully tried to work out what we need, and that's the question I've asked. Somebody asked me what would happen, when that funding concludes. And the simple answer is, I think this is that important that we should be trying to somehow build it into core business, or certainly if it's agreed nationally, it would come into the national side. And my plan would be, if the committee agree, is I would report back to you on it regularly on the MATAC process and exactly how that's progressing and what I need, not with a view necessarily to getting additional funding, but to give you a position of how effective or otherwise it's been and what progression that we've made in terms of drawing it into core responsibilities. The simple fact just now is, with the staffing I have in that public protection agenda arena and the volume of work they have, I do need that additional administrative support in the initial stage to get it set up so that we can be much more efficient and much clearer about that gathering of information. But I think once we start getting those processes more streamlined, I can certainly give you updates as part of my regular update, if that would be helpful.
Just Stephen House, I saw him on the TV or I read it in the press, Chief Constable for Scotland, I should have said, give me his title. That was one of his priorities, was domestic violence, so I take it this is just part of you said it's something we want to do, but it's also a national initiative, or aspiration anyway.
It's been rolled out to all divisional commanders in terms of a process that they have used in former Strathclyde. We all got the opportunity to read it. We've probably embraced it really pretty quickly and got up and running very, very quickly in comparison perhaps to some other colleagues who either had something existing in place and they're trying to make the transition. And that's not criticism of them. I think it's just how you take it. But I'm sure members will not be surprised to know it's probably something quite close to my heart. Therefore, it got a priority. And actually, we are starting to see very effective management of this really important area of business.
That's great. Graham?
Thanks, Chair, again. DG First used to have a mobile CCTV system. But to go back, if I could just go back to CCTV, the likes of Whithorn, is there no chance that we could get something in there which maybe it doesn't go straight onto the full police system, but is recorded in a facility within the town that police could look at in time to come, the next day if there's an incident, and they could maybe pick up who the perpetrators were. That's the first point. And to go back to Kate's advocacy thing, I think that's a very good thing, because I have chaired the Employment Appeals Committee in the council, and you get people appealing against a dismissal or appealing against some decision that's been taken against them, and they're out of their comfort zone, and it's very, very difficult. It's quite an intimidating situation for them, and I had great sympathy with them. So I fully applaud that, but just it's the CCTV thing.
With regard to the CCTV in Whitcomb, we could certainly look at that. The systems as they are at the moment, the images go back to a recording device in a local police station, but any new system wouldn't necessarily have to go back to a local police station. They could go back to a council premises.
I think the police have the use of a facility, or they used to have the use of a facility in Whithorn, which was the old police station. It's now shared with the ambulance service, and the big cost with the initial proposal for the CCTV was getting the images I used to say they were going to bounce them off hubcaps, but they were going to send them through the air and off a sort of satellite system to get it to Newton Stewart, so that it could then go into the underground system to take it to Stranraer, where it would be monitored all the time. And that was going to be that was a big cost. The actual cameras, they're a cost, but they're not a phenomenal cost. So if you could get something that worked within the community so that the incidents could be recorded and used at a later stage. Well, some of them do use iPhones when they have got down that far. So just, if you could just look at that, that's all I'm asking.
Thanks, Graham. Just when we're on about CCTV and considering I was told not to mention Kirkconnell about, we had mobile cameras in Upper Nithsdale, and they were in the same street in Galloway for 3 years at one point. They didn't always really get, because of the quality in that time, didn't really get a lot of the information. Somebody did ask me about the situation in Sanquhar and Kirkconnell. The communities of Sanquhar and Kirkconnell, Galloway, have funding for cameras. They've achieved funding for the cameras. We did have an officer designated to try and get that in place. The problem was, like Graham was looking for, we could have got them locally, but we weren't having that link. And because the police stations aren't manned all the time, they weren't getting monitored. And that's why they've been hanging on to see if they can get the link from Upper Nithsdale to Dumfries. And I know there's been a wee bit of a problem with that since. It has been a bit frustrating because it's quite a few years since, especially the Sanquhar Community Council tried to get them in the area. So I'm just wondering if anybody's any knowledge of what's happening with that one.
As we've said in the report, we've been working with Technology Solutions to find a way to get a solution to that, but not only to Sanquhar and Kirkconnell, but to the other systems, because they stand alone. The only two systems that are monitored 24/7 are Dumfries and Sederunt. And with the development of the Swan network, which will be rolled out, starts next November, we're looking to work with TS to find a way that we can stream images back from the standalone sites to a central location, whether it be Dumfries, Sederunt, both, or whatever, that they can be monitored 24/7. So we're looking at that, and with colleagues from Business and Technology Solutions, to see if that can be rolled into the Swan project next year.
Thank you. Any further questions, members? Note the recommendations. Rana? Happy?
Yeah, the recommendations, Kate said that she would bring a future report, obviously maybe 6 months to give it a chance to bed in. So if that's captured in the minute, that'd be great.
I think, Claire, are you okay with that? Thanks for that, Kate. Item 14, Kate gave verbal update on recent developments. Police Scotland. Back to Kate.
You just need to look at the papers. Exactly. We're not talking about that though. About operational incidents, we continue to develop our structures and just move away from what was the constabulary. A lot of it's about naming conventions, and I won't bore you with the details of that, but we're making good progress. We're getting to the point where we're just in the final consultation within our team about what the structure will look like. From your point of view, it won't change fundamentally from the inspectors that you see and the teams on the ground. It may be just their tasks from slightly different places, but they're effectively doing the same job, and they are following the plan that you've approved. We have had a lot of incidents, and as a snapshot, Group 1 crimes that I'll bring next month to you, you'll see that we've seen a rise in Group 1s, which are the kind of violent offences. You will know we've had 2 murders since the beginning of Police Scotland. And no, there is absolutely no significance to that. However, in general, some of the violent crime had reduced. What we're seeing are a number of street robberies increasing in comparison to last year. Last year was particularly low in terms of incidents for the first 6 months. This year we're seeing a bit of a rise in street robberies. most of them, if not all, are detected, but there's a couple of concerning ones where elderly people have been assaulted, but I will probably bring them back as significant incidents to you next month, next month when I report on the 6 monthly figures. The other one where we've seen a rise in Group 1 are some of the cruel and unnatural treatment of children. It's quite an old piece of legislation, but it's where children have been left on their own, or their parents have been unable to care for them due to their alcohol or drug intake. So we are seeing a few more of them reported than we saw last year. That might sound a negative, but actually for me it's about very proactive police work, that when they are going to house they're making that assessment, and obviously we're working with partners because they have knock-on child protection issues with them, but we've seen an increase there. We've also seen an increase in Group 2s, which is the sexual crime area. I've already probably covered it in some of the MATAC. You'll not be surprised to know that some of the violence that it's felt by domestic abuse victims is sexual violence. So we've seen an increase there. We've also had 2 or 3 cases recently where it's one offender with multiple offences, quite significantly multiple offences. So I will be reporting next month on an increase, but again, I'll give you additional context about that. We continue to see rural thefts. It comes and goes, and a lot of those, some are local people, and again, we're trying to get on top of that, but I'm sure you'll understand my priority so far has been probably Group 1s and Group 2s, which are the personal injury offences first and foremost. But we've had some good successes, and a young man who hailed from the kind of northwest of England appeared here, and he will be reported for a number of offences in the east of the division, and equally some are travelling from the central belt down, but again we've got positive lines of inquiry, so there's a lot of work going on to the Group 3s. We've seen a reduction in a lot of the public disorder, and surprisingly for us, given what a fantastic summer we've had of weather, it didn't then translate in some of the perhaps alcohol-fuelled incidents that others have seen, which I want to say I'm pleased with, and I'm slightly surprised with, because it certainly felt in other areas to be a significant issue, but we haven't felt that. And finally, probably the only area I want to cover is the road policing. We have seen an increase in our area of the people killed and seriously injured on our roads for the first 6 months. The details of that I will report to you. We have done some analysis of it, and I'm not sure we're still clear. There are some older drivers that are involved. If I give you an example, that there was a couple of incidents yesterday, not in our area, in another area, where it's older people who are injured in car accidents. They're maybe not the cause of it, but their ability to recover is significantly harder, and therefore the likelihood of complications. So I'm having a look at that from our perspective to see, and again I would give you more context next time, but we have seen an increase in the fatalities that we've had on our road in the first 6 months in comparison to last year as well. Other than that, it has been business as usual. We have got over a number of events over the summer period, all of which have passed really positively. I think the weather helped everybody's mood as well, but I think they were hugely successful. But again, I will give you that fuller performance report next month.
Thanks for that, Kate. Member, any questions? Right, thanks for that. Thanks for that update, Kate. Item 15, any other business deemed urgent by the chairman due to the need for a decision. Members, I do have a urgent piece of business that I would hope that you'll take today, and we have a report. If we could give you 5 minutes to read the report, would you be willing to look at taking this item of business? Thank you. Could you distribute the report? To give the members time to read this, we'll adjourn till 10 to 1, just to have a bit of time to take it in. Staying on, I believe this was an urgent item of business that we would like to hear today. I'll pass on to Derek to read to this report.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm, firstly, for members, the reason that it is urgent, you will appreciate, is in relation to the decision that you took at full council earlier this week, which was twofold. Firstly, I would just focus on that it was remitted to this subcommittee to raise the issues that were considered at full council on Tuesday with the members of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Board, who we were aware of would be attending today. So that's why it's urgent, and the requirement of the subcommittee today is to indeed have that discussion with our colleagues from the board who are here today. Just to reaffirm, the background to this is clearly the council on Tuesday, as you can see in paragraphs 4.1, 4.2 and 4.3, were fairly clear that they did not appreciate the way in which this information was communicated, nor the fact that there was no prior consultation with the council. So the clear view of the council was, as you can see from the paragraphs 4.1, 4.2 and 4.3, to express these views to the Fire and Rescue Board, and equally importantly, to yes, acknowledge the operational autonomy of the service, but also that clearly we would expect that if there were future proposals that could impact on public safety, that in fact, or confidence of the public, that these would in the first instance be a matter to be determined, or certainly to be brought to this council prior to any implementation. So that's the background. Members are well aware of that, having been there on Tuesday, but that's the background to the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Derek. Any comments, Graham?
Yeah, this is a very emotive subject for people of Dumfries and Galloway. I think there's a fear that this is the thin end of what might be a very thick wedge, and for years to come. We're losing local knowledge, which is not a good thing. And I just fear that it's a start of something which could finish up with serious repercussions due to the lack of local knowledge. I mean, somebody phones up and says there's a fire in Borg. Well, it could be Borg in Outer Hebrides as easily as Borg in near Kirkcudbright. So there's a whole lot of things embedded in this, which is a big problem for this area, and we are responsible, or we're not directly responsible, but we have to put forward the views of our constituents, whether it be in Annandale, Nestdale, or Pernistdale, or Wigtonshire. And there is genuine fear out there that this will lead to serious repercussions further down the line. I don't think I want to say much more at the moment. I'll hear what Ronnie and you have to say, Chair, but I have great fears for this, and as I say, I just fear that it is the start of a very thick wedge, and I'm concerned about that.
Thanks, Ronnie.
We sat through the transition and the Pathfinder, and we asked questions about such things as this. So we were given assurances that nothing would happen for the first year to let everyone bed in. And no more than 6 months, we've seen 3 bits of bad news in Dumfries and Galloway. 2 we're going to discuss at full council, and this one here that's been remitted to us to talk about today. There was a strong feeling from the full council about, and Derek's articulated very well, that it was a lack of communication, the way this thing came about, or was expressed. I'll give you a wee example. Just 2-3 weeks ago, and Devil might know this better than me, I read a report in the Evening News and Star, which is a Cumbrian-based paper. My wife's from Cumbria, so we get that paper just to keep abreast of what's happening in Carlisle and areas. And the Annan fire engine was mobilised to go to an incident in part of Cumbria, because the control room there is in Lancaster, I believe, and they asked the computer said the nearest thing is Annan, which is in Scotland, obviously. It was demobilised or stood down quite quickly because the Cumbrian or Carlisle tender said, hang on, we can get there faster. That's the danger that Graham was in. I mean, we lose that local knowledge, and if you rely on sat-navs or, you know, whatever it is, we might lose that. And that's a worry. This is a rural area with lots of unique names. I mean, we had a situation where Sorby School was getting shut and the community centre, and a lot of us didn't know where Scorby was. No, I put my hands up. Well, I know Annandale and Eskdale well, but I'm not sure about the other areas. But the point I'm making is a serious one. There is, because it's rural, and we heavily rely on retained fire personnel, this local knowledge is a big fear. And I gave that example with the Annan one being mobilised because of the centralisation or part centralisation in England, worried that might prevail in Scotland. I think the Chief Executive and Derek have articulated very well our main concerns. Lastly, is 4.5 is to put on record the contribution made by fire control staff for public safety. And we're losing not so many service people, but the civilians in both services. That's a worry as well. You know, Dumfries and Galloway isn't blessed with high employment levels, so we hate to lose anybody. And the fear we have, and maybe we might get an answer today, is a salami move or salami slice towards centralisation, which wouldn't be fair to this area. And so that's my strong feelings, Chair, and be on record now because it's been taped.
No, I think to speak for most is running through the Pathfinder process. Every paper you read had very much an emphasis on local knowledge, local services, local people. And when people heard about single forces and whatever, they automatically had rumours going about the smaller villages that their fire station was going to shut. And, us as members were assured more or less that, you know, don't worry too much about that. It's a knee-jerk reaction, but it's turning out now it isn't a knee-jerk reaction. As Graham said, is this the thin end of the wedge, and people are concerned that the service is going to be depleted because we haven't got that local input. Graham?
Yeah, I mean, Ronnie's quite right. A big rural area, third biggest in Scotland, third biggest local authority area in Scotland, geographically. We have a lot of small communities with strange sounding names. We also, from east to west, have a tremendous difference in accent. The people in the far west talk with, well, it's sort of half Irish accent, really. And the people in the east talk with a more sort of Cumbrian type of accent. So there is a big difference right across the region there. And somebody excited in a time of stress, phoning a command centre, and what to them could be a foreign land. I'm not saying they're going to outsource it to India just yet, but to a way up to the central belt with the tensions and the shock of the system at the time, with a strange accent, we could get, and there's a definite danger here that we could get total misunderstanding of where the actual incident could happen and what is actually taking place. And that is, to me, is a big danger and a big worry to the people of Dumfries and Galloway. So I think I've said enough. I think it's about time we heard from the guys that are making the decision.
Thanks, Graham. The representatives wish to make a comment? This young lady will fix you up in just a second.
Thank you. I hear your concerns. Thanks for the opportunity to come down and talk today. I'm Director of Service Delivery for the West of Scotland, which includes Dumfries and Galloway and the former Strathclyde and 13 different council areas. And first and foremost, just looking at the paper that's been presented today in front of us, we have to hold our hands up and say we've got the consultation wrong. Absolutely wrong. I think we have misjudged part of what was going on, and I think if you consider the strategic intent document, and I think you have an extract on the front there under 3.2, the board went through a series of development days over a course of probably the last 2 months, looking at each of the individual areas. Now, each of these individual areas you see in 3.2 there are massive change programmes within the service alone. When you combine them together, it is quite considerable. So the consultation exercise, what we had going through the board last week, we didn't really understand about the full impact of the decisions that was going to be made. I think if we go back, and the phrase I've heard repeatedly and the comments that you've all made so far is the thin end of the wedge. And if we go back to the aims of reform, it's actually to protect frontline services. So the strategic intent document that the board were looking at, these premises, control rooms were in scope. What was out of scope was any fire station in Scotland. They are not in our sites at all. So this is not the thin end of the wedge for service delivery. And the first key aim of fire reform is about protecting frontline service delivery. And that is our aim. It's what, when Pat Waters and Jimmy Campbell came down here in March to your last meeting as the local authority controlled fire and rescue service in Dumfries and Galloway, that was a commitment that Pat gave, that nothing is changing in terms of frontline service delivery. He also said we weren't looking how we delivered the service, we were looking how we manage the service, and that's what the board have been doing over the last period of time. I think we heard from Richard earlier on about the change process that's going to come. We heard from Kate about their performance management and then the difficulties of integrating 8 into 1. And what we've inherited is 8 legacy services that were designed to run standalone fire and rescue services and the infrastructure to support that. The other element of reform is to look at protecting that front line by making the savings in the right areas, and that's what we have to do. And looking at the strategic intent document in terms of the areas we're looking at is to realise property savings and predominantly there, and looking at the control rooms and the licensing costs, the infrastructure costs of that to protect frontline services. We've got, in the first 3 years, in excess of £30 million cash to take out the budget. So a lot of that work has taken the board in that direction. I think what the pressure we've had this year, without a shadow year to come in place, is the board actually took control of the service in April 1st. They've had very quickly to come up with decisions to actually support budget savings for next year and the year beyond. And in doing that, considering all these things at once, has probably distracted us from actually engaging with some of our local partners. And for that, we apologise. I'm sure if Pat was here today, he would have apologised too. I think what we need to do from this is reflect on a missed opportunity and give that commitment that Pat gave some time ago about engaging the local authorities. The 4 board members that are for the West recognise that, and we need to learn from that at this moment in time.
Yep.
Just a comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I just want to pick up on 2 aspects that Councillors Ogilvie and Nicholl have raised in their questions as well, or made comments earlier. I was a councillor in Glasgow until last May, until I decided to stand down and concentrate on business interests. And that experience of being on a joint board, being in an area that had a joint board, I knew full well that what I received as a local elected member was a statistical tactical assessment report, roughly once a month, useful to a certain extent, but in some ways quite difficult if you didn't actually have something, a narrative with it to explain what that was about. I found my most useful engagement with police and fire at my local community planning partnership, which was similar to maybe the area committee that you would have down here, where we could hear in more detail how policies and strategies were making sense in the local communities we represented. At the full council and any of the council committees, we heard nothing from Strathclyde Fire Brigade, or Strathclyde Fire and Rescue Service as it was.
in the end. You had, 2 or 3 of your group colleagues perhaps on the board, and they might filter information back into the group itself. And one of the reasons why I supported the creation of single services for police and fire during that time I've been elected was that idea that what I want to see is stronger engagement with local authorities. Now, Dumfries and Galloway is, along with Fife, different to the former 8 areas in that you probably feel that you have lost that local democratic control because you had that integrated within your council structures itself. So I'm kind of, if Pat was here, I'm sure he'd probably agree with me, is that, this is the one side of it where perhaps you feel that you're at a loss as part of that change compared to, say, some of the other local authority areas. In the new board structure, we have 4 standing committees, and I chose to take on chairing the local and stakeholder engagement committee. And it has taken us a bit of time to get to grips with understanding, partly from the lessons learned through the LSC project board and the learning journeys we've gone through, partly waiting to ensure that everybody was bedded into their roles as LSOs and starting to make sure the operational relationships were built. And for us as a committee to get together and start to identify what are the key principles of consultation and engagement that we want to promote for SFRS. We're not quite there yet in terms of agreeing what the principles are. We've been able to move on some aspects and try to encourage the board to take on, as part of its process of engagement, 4 for each of the 4 board members identified with each of the 3 service delivery areas, that all 4 will meet with each local authority area at least once a year. We would meet the chief executive, leader of the council, perhaps key spokespeople or chairs of respective committees, look at what are essentially the good practices taking place in a local authority area. Now that has kicked off as a board member in the West area. I've visited about 5 local authorities out of the 13 so far. The day or the focus on what Dumfries and Galloway is still to take place yet. These have been hugely informative to help us and influence how we see the service going forward. We've got still quite a long way to go yet, and the things like the review of control rooms is part of a service transformation programme that is to have a stakeholder engagement strategy supporting that. And this is one of the things, the pressures of, in order to meet transitional funding arrangements, we've had to bring forward some of the work that we're doing within that service transformation programme that has basically put pressures on the ability to be able to conduct true consultation in the way that I wanted to see happen in this service. So, as Davis said before, we have to hold up our hands in terms of the way the strategic intent process was handled in terms of local engagement, something that we're going to learn from and hopefully change. Hopefully we won't be in the same pressured environment in which to make these type of decisions so quickly. I know the board felt, and especially over the last month leading up to the last Thursday's board decision, we had 3 separate board development workshops alone to take us from outline business case through strategic options to what became the final options to be considered at the board meeting. That was quite a steep learning curve for a number of board members to take that through. So we agree that we understand that we have a very strong role to play with our communities. We want to learn a lot from that and engage with you to do that. So I certainly will take back to the board, take back to our local stakeholder engagement committee that process, and I hope that even at next Tuesday at the Learning Journey event in Cosla, you again will be there to reinforce these views and to help us embed with the rest of our board and with our colleagues that this is an important aspect that we have to take on board for the future.
Thank you. Graham, you got a question?
Not so much a question. I disagree with Mr Boyle on the fact that they got the consultation wrong. They didn't get the consultation wrong because there wasn't a consultation. So you can't get something wrong if you don't do it. That's the first thing I would say. And if this is the way that it's going to go in the future with things being thrust upon us, well, we might as well not be here. There's got to be consultation. They've got to take. Look, we had fine words from Pat Waters and the company that they were going to be consulting, and there would be this and that and the next thing, and it's not happened so far. And that is not a good start to a new a body. It's not a good start. And I would ask these good gentlemen here, it's not their fault, but I would ask them if there's any chance of rewinding this decision so that we can go through a consultative is that right, process, so that at the end of the day, you have got, before you take the decision, you have got the thoughts and the fears and the people on board. At least try and keep them on board, because at the moment you're starting off on a bad footing, chaps. I'm sorry, but is there any chance of a rewind that we can start this process again?
Well, on behalf of the board, unfortunately, no, there would not be an opportunity to do that. The strategic decision was made on Thursday. I moved an amendment to reduce it to 3 rather than 2. That was as much as we were able to, or considered any change to what was the original proposals going forward. We have, time is against us in terms of being able to get accessing transitional funding, to be able to award contracts for infrastructure, for ICT, in order to make sure that we have the right setup to take our structure forward. What I would go back to, when you talked earlier about how this is a motive and talking about the thin end of the wedge, I think you were right in suggesting that fear is probably one of the greatest issues here, and fear naturally becomes an issue that is wrapped in emotions. And we've heard from a number of mainly parliamentarians around the country who have raised similar issues to you around things like local knowledge, accents, etc., not being able to understand that. The research and the evidence within the service and with other emergency services within Scotland, such as the ambulance service, which reduced their control rooms as well, is that in a state of emergency, people are actually far more clear about what they want to achieve than actually we believe. And that actually helps cut through some of the accent issues. The biggest issue in terms of understanding a caller during emergencies is actually someone who English is not their first language. And that's where we have difficulties at that stage of helping somebody through that process. But that doesn't matter which control room would be answering that call. They would have the same issue regardless of where they're located within Scotland.
Graham, you want to come back?
If I could come back, you mentioned fear. There is a fear that we're entering a regime of dictatorship. And as far as I'm aware, we still live in a democratic society. And I just have great fear that we're going down a route which is not acceptable to the population, and certainly not to people of Dumfries and Galloway, who are a decent, honest, hard-working community who want to be involved in decision-making. And we are their elected representatives to take part in that decision-making. And at the moment, we haven't been asked. We are now expressing our fears and our concerns, and it would appear to me that those are, stable door and horse run away seems to spring to mind. So I'm just seriously concerned about it.
Any other questions to the board members? Right.
Just an observation. I mean, this is driven by cost. I mean, I saw Pat Waters on the TV when this was, and the Chief Fire Officer, we've got to make 7, so it's been driven by cost. Made the point that, and I understand that, we're all feeling the pinch. Sorry, you're behind me. The mic's there. We're all driven to look at 7s. John's mentioned it. We were asking these questions and we're given assurance that nothing really would change until it was all bedded in. And yet here we've got a couple of decisions from both services within 6 months. You've made it clear that Johnson is going to stay. I'm not, and this might sound ignorant, but I don't really know where Johnson is. Is it west of Glasgow? And then there's some options for other areas. So, yeah, fine, you got the consultation wrong, but you made a decision now and you're going to stick by it. So any future consultation, and I don't know what's planned for the future, you've given assurance that, so really, the Chief Executive is going to write on our behalf. It's just basically saying what Graham said, we're going to clear up after the horses bolted, as it were, which doesn't satisfy us, because this is a big decision for us. We're going to lose local employment, local knowledge. You've made the point. Nobody's answered my question about the assurance that what happened in Annan a couple of weeks ago won't happen again, where a fire engine was mobilised because of some sat-nav computer said that was the closest station. Have we learned from that? I mean, I don't want to put Neville on the spot, but as a national board, you might be aware of that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how these things filter up to yourselves. It wasn't reported here. I read it in the newspaper, so you could argue there again, you know. As local members, we understand the big picture. I mean, we're not naive enough to say that everyone's got to stay the same. All we're asking for is to be consulted and let us know. So if people come to us, at least, there's nothing worse as a local member said, what's that about? And you say, I haven't got a clue. And that's not just on this issue, it's across the board. As a local member, and I've been a local member for a long time, it's one frustration that I have. And hopefully, if you're giving us that assurance, things will improve in the future. That's good. We can say that, tell people that, you know, that you've recognised that there was a failing there, and we'll learn from that. But if somebody could just tell me what we've learned from the Annan Carlisle thing, and how we're going to put that into the national psyche, if you want, I'd appreciate that.
I'm happy to answer that at least. I can't give a reassurance it won't happen again, because if it's been a mobilisation across to Cumbria, it's actually come from their control room, and I don't have any control over the mobilising issues down there. Johnson is in Renfrewshire, it is to the west of Glasgow. It's a control room that was formed some years ago from 5 previous control rooms within the Lanarkshires and Glasgow, etc. So we've already brought 5 together into one. It covers the former Strathclyde area. It covers about 30-something inhabited islands. It's got very remote rural areas up in Argyll and Bute to the city centre of Glasgow. It's got a significant number of staff. It handles in excess of 300 emergency incidents every day. So it's in a very experienced control room. The staff down here hugely experienced and significant local knowledge, which we hope some of that will be embedded within. Nothing can change until we do some technical changes, and there's at least 5 to 6 months of testing before we go live on anything, and that's where we capture all the information. What we do within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service is every vehicle is fitted with an automatic vehicle location system, which feeds into the control. It tells you the nearest available appliance. So it's not necessarily about an appliance in a station, it's actually what appliance is nearest. Any member of the public would expect to have the nearest resource mobilised at their time of need. So we minimise all the chance of mobilising the wrong appliances, and that comes through professional control room staff getting the right information in the right time. It's interesting that one of the performance indicators, which is a national indicator, is about call handling time, but the staff in the control room are absolutely clear. It's about spending as long as they need to on the phone to get the right information to mobilise the right people with the right skills and the right resource. So that's what we are about doing. So we will be working with the control room staff in Dumfries. I've been down personally twice in the last 10 days to speak to them as a group and to speak to them as individuals about what's the best to look after them in the future. Now, whether that's any HR support issues, about retraining, redeployment, moving up to Johnson or to another control room, we're working with them individually and with the trade unions at this moment in time. So we will try and mitigate anything we can. As far as the learning goes, as I said earlier on, we apologise. We didn't consult. The consultation from that aspect is something we need to learn from and get better in the past.
Thanks. When the board members were down at the last meeting, they visited the great resource that we have at Cargan Bridge, at Cargan Towers. On the bullet point at 3.2, we were saying a single national training facility supported by a number of single and multi-scenario facilities across the service, which isn't easy to say with these teeth. How would they be determined, these other facilities? And I know people as well, are we going to lose this facility out here?
I think what is referred to in the strategic business case, the strategic intent document, refers to we've got we have a very significant building up in South Lanarkshire, which is the Clydes Mill Training Facility, and we also have a national training facility across in East Lothian and Gullen. All this was determined as there would be one national centre, and then that allows the board to consider the release of the property in East Lothian. As for the regional centres, they will be in the locations that they are at this moment in time, because they are in the right locations to service local communities. So the one out at the Garrick is a fantastic facility. I was delighted to see that opened just before the local authority handed control over the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and that, as Neville mentioned earlier on, is providing a fantastic resource, not just for the crews in the former Dumfries and Galloway, but also in South Ayrshires and Lanarkshires as well. So that's got a very bright future in front of it.
Is there any further questions for the board members?
Honestly, I think they've heard the message and we've heard the answers, and if we can move on from this, that'd be great.
It was more or less along the same lines. I hope they've got the message we're no pleased, for a start, and secondly, that we don't want a repeat of this, if possible. You started off with great promises, etc., and here we are, the first major thing that's happened since the new Scottish Fire Service took place, and you've got it badly wrong with local consultation. So please, give us a break here. You know, as Ronnie says, we're the folk at the front line. Constituent comes to and says, what's going on here? We don't know anything about it. So, you know, advanced knowledge is a great help sometimes.
Yeah, I think, and we also speak for other members that were at the full council a few days ago. Everybody had the same feelings about this issue. But I do thank the members for coming in and answering the questions. It might not have been what we wanted to hear, but we appreciate you coming down and answering the questions anyway. We can now go to the recommendations. 2.1, members are asked to note the decision of Dumfries and Galloway Council regarding the decision of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Board on 26 September 2013. And 2.2, raise these issues with members of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Board who are in attendance at today's meeting that we've done. And thanks again for all attending today. Could I just note before the meeting ends, if all the groups could reaffirm their nominations to this committee, because it's usually a well-attended committee and it's a very important committee. And I think it's just with the transition today that people weren't able to come today. But if we could just reaffirm who is now the new members on this committee. And thanks everybody for attending. Meeting's closed. Thanks.